Hello everyone, this video will be different from my normal cancer. In this video, I will teach you the art of fucking. But first, what is FUCC? FUCC stands for fully utilizing a card's capabilities. But I'll just use the term FUCC for the sake of convenience. So without further ado, here is my guide on how to FUCC Blond Ezel. The fucking process will have 6 segments. I will be covering each notable card or aspect briefly. And by notable, I mean it is either a good and valuable card, or it's a bad card, that I see often enough, and I need to highlight its issues. And so, let's begin. Upon first glance, gold seems to have many good starters. But I believe that the common starters I see on ranked have glaring issues that people tend to overlook when building Ezel. While I may want to just label these as irrelevant, this is a guide on fucking, so I may as well cover every aspect of these cards. I think it's only fair if we start with the main starter for Ezel, since set 5. Kurth requires you to run specific cards to enable his skill to superior right Ezel. While this may have been relevant before set 8, the cards you need to include in order to enable this card take up valuable space for the cards that matter the most. While Gareth does see some use for his ability to generate numbers against cross rides, Bowmain takes up valuable space for Blaster Spirits. The supride is at its best when you run crits, but Blaster Spirits being able to retire lets you push for damage naturally without relying on triggers. Unlike the last starter, this card is not tied to many specific pieces that disrupt your deck building options too much, but the timing and the usage of this card in golds with a card like Blond Ezel is too awkward to justify its place in the deck. Kron and Koran follow the same role, so I will be covering them both simultaneously. They both want to search for Blond Ezel. This deck doesn't really need its starter to do much, so it can afford to run G3 searchers to help search for Blond Ezel, with Kron allowing you to search for jailers for extra utility, while Koran being 5k lets you scale better early on. These two will be returned to later once we discuss triggers. Grade 1s in this deck are mostly up to preference, as it is the most flexible and unique part of most Ezel decks. With Kurth no longer being a must, it allows for more unique options that I will be fucking thoroughly. While this should be a no-brainer, I'll put a short mention for Sentinels just because, and if you don't know what Sentinels do or don't run for, I suggest you uninstall the game. And for the sake of future purposes, Liberator Mark comes out soon, and will become the go-to PG for Ezel. So for the actual grade 1 options, Disciple of Pain helps enable Ezel's game plan in the scenario where you can limit break earlier and go for more aggressive plays even when your opponent actively denies Ezel. You should always run 4. This card is a filter, not much to cover here, but unlike most other clans, golds can afford to run a few copies. Trashing out dead cards in hand can be quite useful, because filtering into more intercepts or PGs is never a bad thing. This card is practically a free draw when called by Ezel, but Ezel ideally wants to save its CB for Blaster Spirits and other intercepts. But nevertheless, calling it in rain when you can't seem to find intercepts, and being able to at least draw can be quite useful. And now we have the other Soul Blast to draw card. I'll be calling her Safe 4 Work because it's convenient. Safe 4 Work is a free draw. It being active on all times just makes it a solid one of option. But its base power hurts it when trying to scale. Even with Blaster Spirits, Safe 4 Work just makes poor numbers, and is best put behind Ezel. Despite my thoughts on Kurth, Gareth still has value for being a good option if you want to be able to make good numbers against opponents on cross-ride numbers. But that's all he really is used for, a beat stick without much utility. So whether or not you want to account for the cross-ride matchup will determine Gareth's use in the deck. Like the previous witch, I'll be calling this one BMW for the sake of convenience. Not only is BMW a car company, but Vanguard's BMW's effect is similar to car. Coincidence? I think not. But like car, being able to call the top card of the deck could be either godlike or absolute dogshit. Do note that playing this with Pelennor is like playing Russian roulette, and I highly don't recommend it, unless you have massive balls. This card can be ran at a few copies for all you gamblers out there. These cards are the real MVPs of the deck, since they will be the ones often called by Ezel. Hence, each card in your grade to lineup should each have value that warrants its spot. This part of the deck is the most competitive, and is where I see a decent amount of Ezel builds go wrong. While our Lord and Savior Majesty Lord Blaster was up on high, he looked down upon Blond Ezel in pity. In an act of kindness, he blessed Blond Ezel with the spirits of his 2 boyfriends, granting him the potential to rise past tier 3, and ascend past even MLB himself. Before we get into the actual Blaster Spirit segment, let's first have a short quiz. What makes Blaster Spirits good? A. Consistent retire 4 GP. B. The fact you can run 8, or C. They have a 10k offensive base that scales well. If you answered any of these, you are wrong. The answer was D. People can't read the second skill. Outside of their innate strength against stupid people, Blaster Spirits are the final pieces that Ezel needed to deal consistent damage over relying on offensive triggers. It makes Ezel's game plan much less clunky, and will be an essential piece when building golds. I highly recommend running 8. With Blaster Spirits being added into the mix, Ezel's demand for open CB skyrockets. So this card helps lighten that issue by halving the cost of a spirit call. I highly recommend running at least 3 or more. This card is something you can call when you want another attacker, or if you want a second chance to search a spirit. This is a decent one of option in the deck for its ability to also lessen the load on Ezel for superior calls. This card functions similar to its G1 counterpart. It enables your game plan sooner, and that's never a bad thing. I suggest running 1 or 2 copies. Whether you trash a spirit or trip in exchange for that second copy is up to personal preference. This card is a 10k vanilla that is often ran at 4/4 turbo variants of the deck. The issue is that it's in the grade 2 lineup, which contains some of the most valuable pieces in golds. Its very nature as a vanilla beatstick hurts the deck by doing so little, and it clogs up space for better cards. Nevertheless, it's a decent one of option and nothing more. This card also suffers from the same issues as Bowmains. It's just another beatstick, and this 12k attacker is also mediocre for the same reasons Burning Horn is. It's only active on grade 3, as compared to the likes of Bedivere and Masquerade. This is also another one of option at best. Gold Paladin's grade 3 lineup can range from either extremely budget or premium as hell, because either way, your main grade 3 ride will always be Blond Ezel. But despite every other grade 3 in this lineup paling in comparison to Blond Ezel, they still hold some form of value in the deck that we are going to cover in this segment. After being absolute horseshit in the original TCG, Ezel has been blessed by God with the skills that make every other grade 3 in golds look like jokes in comparison. This will be your deck's main engine. I don't think I need to explain why Blond Ezel is as good as he is. He enables most of your deck, and now with Blaster Spirits, you can run draws to not rely on Ezel as your main source of advantage. Ezel is absolutely amazing at what he does. I don't think you need a guide to tell you to run 4. While this card is meant to be the evolution of Blond Ezel, he does the exact opposite of what he used to do. So instead of being consistently good and valuable all game, he only shines during brief moments, and does between jackshit and fuck all for a decent amount of games. This card isn't bad, it's that Ezel is infinitely better in most scenarios, and prepare for this to be a common theme throughout the rest of this segment. Despite being outclassed, being a potent finisher warrants him a spot in this deck. Jailer's Persona Blast could come in quite useful, because it can be fetched with Kron, but that's only 1 turn of value, before devolving into any other GPG3 and just returning to doing absolute jackshit afterwards. And like Platina, he gets blocked off by double intercept. But on the bright side, all of his skills cost no CB. At best, he is an okay backup for Blond Ezel. At worst, he is an 11k vanilla for most of the game. Garmor is a solid option, because he can guarantee a subcall from deck without limit break, and unlike Jailer, he isn't tied to a Persona Blast, so it's guaranteed value for 1 turn. But like all other grade 3s in this deck, it evolves into shit after 1 turn. He is just another backup in the case you don't get Ezel. This card at best is filler, while it may make decent numbers late game. it does not provide much utility, and it is much better to just run one of the other grade 3s over this card as they at least provide more options. Normally, this segment was going to end here, but anyone who knows me knows what's coming next. I will now be covering the actual best card in the deck. Everyone who knows me personally knows how much I love this beautiful piece of shit. This card fails in almost every aspect. It's even more dead in hand than Lop and in rain. His superior ride isn't optional, so you can end up shooting yourself in the dick on accident when using cards that top call. There are so many things wrong with this card, except his one pro of being able to be superior road after calling a spirit. Whether that warrants a spot in the deck is up to preference. At his best, he is a finisher from deck. At his worst, he is a dead card in hand. With the addition of Blaster Spirits, the trigger lineup also becomes much more flexible, allowing for more consistent options. I'll be covering each trigger type and how they benefit or hurt the deck. Draws are draws. I don't think I need to say why draws are just consistently good all around. Especially now, where multiple clans have access to crit pressure and multi-attacks. Drawing into PGs will always be valuable in a number of matchups, while it also lightens the load on Ezel to generate advantage. What used to be one of the most popular trigger lineups to run in GP is now the worst offensive trigger you can possibly run. Whether or not you find success with this is if you consistently sack your opponent early on. Anyone who has played golds before set 8 knows why crits alone aren't enough to carry the deck. It's inconsistent and relies heavily on playing turbo and praying you sack early on. While I won't deny there are games that you can steal if you sack hard enough, but the new support already gives a more consistent means to push for damage. Now on to what I think is a better offensive trigger to run. Stands have the issues offensive triggers naturally have, but it doesn't make the deck nearly as clunky. Running stands can let you burn through more PGs where crits normally wouldn't. But despite its advantages over crits, I don't think running full stands either is that much better to be considered a decent option. Unlike the previous triggers mentioned, heals are needed in any competent deck, so this portion in particular will discuss what triggers should be assigned to which grade 3 depending on what type of Ezel deck you are running. This is where we will bring up Chronocorin again. Feel free to pause the video to read the proper assignment of heals depending on your deck's starter. Do note that the assignment of heals doesn't change much when running either 9 draws or 9 stands. This is the part of the video where I tackle some things I just couldn't fit in the other segments alongside some questions or arguments I hear online. To start things off, we have the Jukride chain. Unlike the rest of the cards, I couldn't tackle each piece of the Jukride chain individually, but the Jukride engine looks to be another flavor of the Hyrule Golds build. It falls under the same issues as running Kerf, except you run slightly worse vanillas, in exchange for a chance at earlier aggression with the rears you call from deck. But unlike Kerf, you won't be sitting on Blond Ezel, which puts you in a very bad position. Blaster Spirits are dead vanillas in hand. Why run 8? Intercepts are intercepts. They still force your opponent to interact with them. The point of running many Blaster Spirits in deck is to make sure you can consistently superior call them when you check top 4, rather than seeing pointless vanillas. So in short, Ezel makes the deck function. Blaster Spirits make the deck win. If Ezel generates a lot of resources, why is there still a need for draws? If a deck like Coral can run 9 crit due to the amount of resources they generate, why can't Ezel? One thing to keep in mind when talking about advantage is where said advantage goes. Ezel calls onto the field, other decks draw into their hands. Which means while Ezel can consistently confirm to intercepts, he cannot confirm PGs. In a game where almost any good deck can bypass intercepts, being able to draw into PGs is always going to be valuable. If pure offensive triggers aren't good, why not run split triggers? Your experience with split triggers may be much different from mine, because one of the main issues is that it adds another extra layer of RNG. Ideally, you want to hit offensives on your turn then hit draws on your opponent's turn, but sometimes the exact opposite can happen, with stands and crits being at their best during specific stages of the game. You end up wanting to hit a specific trigger during a specific time, all of which adds even more layers of RNG to your deck, which I'm sure a fuck ton of people already hate. If filters like Sagramore are so useful in golds, why don't I see cards like him in other decks? The discussion of filters is quite complex, because it may depend on how your deck wants to function. But you do need to ask yourself the following questions when including any kind of filter in your deck. 1. Do I have better options? 2. When do I need my pieces? This mainly determines what kind of filter you want to run. An example would be MLB. The main reason you run the rest filter over the on-hit boost filter is so that you can see your blasters on your main phase, as compared to drawing them mid-battle, only to be used next turn. 3. Can my deck scale with said filters? Most decks can definitely scale with the 7k filters, making them universally decent filler options in any G1 lineup. But fortunately for golds, being one of the few decks that optimally run 8-10k borders as attackers, makes scaling with the likes of Sagramore possible. Garmor vs Jailer as my backup right. Garmor is best ran in core and builds, preferably as a heal trigger, while Jailer is ran alongside Kron. Whether you like Garmor's guaranteed yet expensive value over Jailer's costless but skills locked to Persona Blast is up to preference. But one thing is for certain, you will most likely die if you aren't on Ezel anyways. So in conclusion, Gold Paladin's new support has changed it from a clunky mess that was carried by Ezel into one of the most consistent decks that is still carried by Ezel. It now has a linear and smooth game plan that finally earns its spot as a good mid-range deck that can compete with a lot of the other threats on ladder. With more options at its disposal, Ezel will be a very potent investment for a long time. Thanks for watching, and hopefully, you learned how to properly fuck from this video. Do note I won't be covering every deck. I'll mainly just focus on the clans I enjoy playing. As to whether or not I find it in me to fuck another deck is up in the air. But until then, see you all next time.